thanks to that British heritage, Kenya became a showpiece. Kenya is still one of the top 3 countries. Well, my family were born in Kenya and they still live in Kenya and they call it Kenya. I don't need a lecture from BLM activists on how to pronounce Kenya.
And those extremist
Marxist
I'm not a Marxist.
that's being put forward.
Welcome back to Rattlesnake TV, guys. In this video, we are going to watch brilliant British historian Rafe Hadel-Menku serve up a verbal tongue lashing to BLM activist Iman Aiton. Now this one starts off civil, guys, but towards the end gets heated and is just packed with all sorts of irony and hypocrisy. So I know you guys are going to enjoy this one. Let's get into the first bits.
As anti-racism activist, Iman Aiton thinks the king should go further and apologise. Why do you think that? Why do you think, I mean, why does it need to be said?
Oh, many reasons. We have to make amends, right? Rafe, I'm hoping you're in agreement with that. We've got to make amends. And
He's not the worst. He's not the worst.
I know, right? But I'll just give you a quote because I think it's really important. So we will not blame them for the crimes or blame him for the crimes of his ancestors. But, or if, he relinquishes the royal rights of his ancestors, okay? So that's the first part. But as long as he claims their rights, then, by virtue of descent, he must shoulder the responsibility of their crimes. It's one of my favourite quotes. Hold on a second.
But what are those rights? Let us know what those rights are.
Let me just explain. His name is James Connolly. He's an Irish Republican and a socialist. So
right, I know who he is.
So, moral of the tale. Oh, okay.
Right.
Oh, that's good.
I know
that's
who Connolly is.
Oh, okay, that's good. So, moral of the tale is just in case if it hasn't resonated. If you inherit something, you should take the good, the bad, and the ugly. Anything less than that is hypocritical.
But if he's acknowledging the hurt,
technically.
he's acknowledged the hurt. But to actually say the word sorry, it means payments have to be made. And that opens the door.
I'm so glad you said that. So that is very true, and I will concede on that point. So an apology basically means an admission of guilt, which means an admission of liability, which opens the floodgates for reparations, which in turn leads to basically UK becoming bankrupt, of course, and all of us here in the studio becoming refugees heading to France on small boats. So I appreciate the fact that if we open the floodgates to reparations, it could cause havoc. So I appreciate that point, and that's why I believe that King Charles will probably just stick with expressing remorse as opposed to apologising and continuously apologising, right?
So what do you think of all of that, Rafe?
Well, I'm a lot more sympathetic, actually, to this issue than, for example, to the ludicrous debates we have about slavery, which was 200 years ago, and Britain has a proud legacy in abolishing the slave trade. This actually is one of the most shameful periods in British imperial history, what happened in Kenya in the 1950s, and the British did overreact in its suppression of the Mau Mau uprising. So I think it's right that the king should...
And Churchill.
I think it's right that the king should actually express regret and sorrow as he is without apologising, and actually he's going to go a long way to actually learning more about what happened during that period. But let's also acknowledge the British were responding to absolute savagery by the Mau Mau themselves, the brutal murdering of whites and African Kenyans as well, hacking them to death with pangos, with machetes, burning them alive. The house of my grandmother's cousin, a Polish Prince Sapieha, was set on fire in an attempt to burn my relations down. No one's been held to account from the Mau Mau side. No one's been apologising on the Mau Mau side. You know, there were faults on both sides, and in the spirit of truth and reconciliation, we should go forward. But it seems always as if it's only Britain that's singled out. Britain's always the evildoer, and everything else is brushed under the carpet.
This one is about to get spicy, but just a few points here. I do enjoy these debates. I mean, what these news stations do is they'll get somebody who's really, really smart and learned and knows their history back to front, like Rafe, and then they'll put them up against an activist. And these activists are like lambs, and not in the biblical sense either. By that, I mean they're sacrificial lambs. They are sacrificed for entertainment's sake. I mean, Piers Morgan has a roster of about 5 of these woke lambs. And every time that the woke have done something ridiculous, he'll just bring one of these lambs in for slaughter at the hands of somebody like Rafe or Douglas Murray.
This one is what we call a sacrificial lamb.
But this topic, though, is a little bit different. Like Rafe said, you'd be crazy not to be sympathetic to the Kenyan cause with this one. This was only in the 1950s, and there were a lot of injustices that happened during this time. The Mau Mau uprising of the 1950s was a long and violent resistance to British rule in Kenya. And the resistance was met with quite brutal means by the British, including torture, mass imprisonment, and much more. And then it brings up the very interesting and widely disputed question, which is, does the undoubted benefits of colonialism, including all of the institutions that were built, all of the increased prosperity in these countries and more, outweigh the atrocities of the occupation? And then what kind of question marks does this raise about Churchill, who was in power from 1951 to 1955 during the uprising? And it makes you think that this would be a very, very interesting debate if it was A, longer, and then B, there was somebody on the other side who actually knew their history and could actually put forth a coherent and intelligent argument that's not just woke virtue signaling. Like, surely there is an academic or a scholar of similar pedigree to Rafe who they could bring on to have a more interesting and robust conversation about this time period, rather than getting on a BLM activist who probably couldn't even point out Kenya on a map. Anyways, let's have a listen to the next bit.
Just to address that point, I think that's a really valid point, and I just want to add some context. So I agree with you. We do tend to focus on the British, and that's partly due to the British education system, because the British education system, this government decided to start black history, African history, from the 15th and 16th century, where black people were enslaved by white people. So we are just literally telling loads of white people that they're superior, and we're literally telling loads of black people that they're inferior, and we're also telling black people that they should continuously be unhappy with white people because their education tells them so. We don't start it from Arabs, we don't start it from Africans. And just to actually answer your point directly, if we could find the Arabs and the Africans that were a part of kind of oppressing African people, I think that would be a part of the equation in terms of reparations and apologies. The reason why we focus on the UK specifically is because the UK...
Guys, if you're enjoying this video, even if you're enjoying it just a little bit, and you could say that you like it more than you hate it, then I would really appreciate it if you could show that by hitting that like button right below. And if you get value from the videos that I make here almost every single day, pretty much every single day at Rattlesnake TV, then make sure to subscribe to the channel, and welcome. Back to the clip.
Okay, they're very meticulous and organised. I would give credit where it's due. They actually left 200 years of evidence, 200 years of evidence of crimes against African people. So this is why we focus on the British Empire and British people, notwithstanding the fact that, of course, hold on a second, notwithstanding the fact that the British Empire, hold on a second, the British Empire actually, just so you know, slavers, they gave people that look like me their surnames, right? So we've also got the British education system that starts everything from slavery. We've got the fact that the British Empire made sure that they named black people with their surnames. So all of these things can be traced back. And of course, we have the evidence, 200 years of clear-cut evidence. Hold on a second, hold on. I'm answering your question. I'm answering your question, Rafe. You just spoke about the fact that why we keep focusing on the British. I'm telling you why. I've just told you, British education system.
But that's
and I've
wrong,
also told you that
the issue is why
it's
aren't we holding to account
it's
the people who were taking part in the 1950s Mau Mau uprising?
And we should
who these
include those
people are. We're not talking about things from
and I'm
200
agreeing
years
with you,
ago.
Rafe.
And let's
I'm
just
agreeing
also
with
acknowledge,
you. You should include those people.
in the decades after independence in 1963, Kenya became the success story of Africa. Without any mineral resources, it became the economic and political showpiece for Africa. Why? Because of its British colonial inheritance. Its parliamentary democracy, the constitutional separation of powers, its British-based military, civil service and police, all of the institutions. And for 45 years, thanks to that British heritage and the leadership of President Kenyatta, Kenya became a showpiece. The last 15 years haven't been that bad, but Kenya haven't been that good. But Kenya is still one of the top three countries. Well, my family were born in Kenya and they still live in Kenya and they call it Kenya. I don't need to lecture from BLM activists on how to pronounce Kenya.
No, it's Kenya. That's the British way of explaining it.
Well,
so that's the difference, right? So you were born in Kenya. I wasn't born in Kenya. I was born here.
Kenya, but
so the British pronounce pronunciation is
Asian
actually
family
Kenya.
were actually. Thanks so much for
well, the British
mine.
British education system tells you that you should pronounce it as Kenya. Just so you know, I went through it.
Thanks so much.
And I'm glad that you told me that, because
It's just
the British
like people in the
education
West
system
calling it
tells me otherwise.
Mumbai, when all Indians say Bombay, all right? We don't need to have this ridiculous
This is why it's so important
Please,
to experience lived experiences. Thank you, Amen. Sorry.
When you come in here,
That little interaction there was everything wrong with these activists, and let me tell you why. She was corrected that the locals do pronounce it Kenya. I mean, I didn't know that it was pronounced Kenya, but fair play, and I trust Rafe, even though I'm going to stick to calling it Kenya. But then when she was called out, she tried to do some mental gymnastics and somehow swindle a narrative together that it is the fault of the British education system that she didn't know that the locals pronounce it Kenya. Or maybe you just didn't know something and you were taught a new thing by a smart person and you should just humble yourself and take the L. Goofy. But the really funny part there, guys, and I'm sure some of you picked this up, is that she was fuming about being called out regarding her Western-centric view of the world. She tried to correct somebody whose family was born in Kenya about how he pronounces the name of his family's homeland. How dare she try and impose her Western values on him? She is basically trying to colonize his language. The irony is just beautiful, guys. But seriously, guys, when you look at what's actually happening here, it is so funny, because what you're seeing is an activist with no real credentials who gets paid to go on TV and give their shitty opinions about social justice causes and how terrible Britain is and how hard it is to be a black person in Britain, whilst at the very same time not acknowledging the almost unbelievable opportunities that she is being given, and only because she is a black person in Britain. The hypocrisy and sheer delusion just gets me every time. On to the last part.
You were basically saying, look, it's a simple thing to do, it's the right thing.
Yeah.
Charles should say, sorry, that's easy. What I'm learning, listening to both of you,
Thank you.
it's not easy.
No, it's not. It's quite convoluted, especially when you address and take in consideration my points as well as race points. It's very convoluted. And when we talk about benefits, right, so you obviously spoke about the benefits in terms of colonialism, and I find that really uncomfortable because we're kind of missing the main point here. Which is, let me just say something. Can I just finish my point, please? Let's just talk about benefits, because that's your main point here, right? So in terms of benefits, well, first and foremost, you cannot say that black people benefit from colonialism and slavery. That would actually... Okay, hold on a second. Well, let's just be clear. It's basically, by the same token, you were also saying that, I don't know, Israel benefited due to, Jews and Hitler benefited due to the Holocaust. You're basically saying that in terms of your basic logic. You're also saying that it applies to Israel and Jews and those that were oppressed.
Marxist.
I'm not a Marxist.
That's being put forward.
I'm not. That's
well,
your prejudice.
Sound like one.
But that's your prejudice.
Kenya benefits hugely from its colonial inheritance. Britain just gave in 2022 £100 million of investment. Canada that same year gave £40 million investment. Why? Because of their British Commonwealth associations and British Commonwealth links. The top 3 countries in Africa for $1 million investments are Nigeria, South Africa and Kenya. What's the common link there? All former British colonies.
Okay. All right, so you're basically saying that we should be okay with being oppressed, enslaved and colonized. That's what you're basically saying.
I'm saying you need to actually...
Guys, we're out of time.
So Rafe on the ball as usual. I love seeing him on these programs, but I maintain that I would love to see some more long-form debates where they can take their time and really go through these issues and get into the weeds of it. It would cause me to get the popcorn out, to say the least. So guys, do hope you enjoyed this one. And if you guys would like to find me on socials, and all of those links will be right below. If you guys would like to subscribe to the channel, that's going to be right here. If you'd like to watch another video, right here. Till next time, I'm Jake. This is RattlesnakeTV, keeping you armed and dangerous.